Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us here today. I'm really heartened by how many in our community are engaging in these virtual gatherings as we grapple with the horrific killings of George Floyd, Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor, and so many other Black adults and children in this country, and what these killings demand that we recognize about systemic racism and the history of anti-Black violence in this country. As I think most of you know, I'm Ann Curzan, Dean of the College of Literature, Science, and the Arts. I'm honored to be here to introduce this panel and then to listen and learn from the colleagues and students who have joined us today to share their experiences and insights. To today's panelists, this is a very generous act on your part for our community, and I'm grateful. Thank you. I will be here for the question session and then conclude today's gathering, which is one early step in the anti-racism work that we must do as a college. I'd like to remind everyone that this session is being recorded and closed captions are available at the bottom of the screen. The session will then be posted on the LSA YouTube channel as well as on the LSA Gateway site. Before I go any further, I want to acknowledge that the University of Michigan is located on the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe people. In 1817, the Ojibwe, Odawa, and Potawatomi nations made the largest single land donation to the University of Michigan, offered ceremonially as a gift in the text of the treaty at the foot of the rapids, so that their children could be educated. Through these words of acknowledgement, their contemporary and ancestral ties to the land and their contributions to the university are renewed and reaffirmed. We're coming together today to foster community dialogue at this deeply painful and turbulent time. I know that members of our community, especially our Black faculty, staff, and students, are experiencing pain, anger, fear, and exhaustion. The fact that Black people in America need to assert that their lives matter is deeply troubling and completely unacceptable. Black lives matter. It should go without saying, and yet it couldn't be more important right now to say it unequivocally. I have heard from many of you over the past couple of weeks, and it is clear that our community has a strong desire to fight racism and violence against Black people. It is not enough, it is not nearly enough just to say that. We as a college must do everything in our power to drive and support the systemic change that we know is needed. We need to start by listening. We need to listen with openness and humility. What you hear about fellow community members' day-to-day experiences of racism on our campus and in our college may upset you or anger you. For those who have the privilege, as I will say that I have, not to endure this kind of racism in your daily life, it may make you uncomfortable to know that this is happening to your peers and colleagues, and perhaps that you didn't realize it was happening or didn't want to realize it was happening. I ask you to sit in that discomfort. Real learning is uncomfortable, and real change is uncomfortable. We also need to educate ourselves. And for those of us who are white, I do not mean putting the burden on Black colleagues and students and other colleagues and students of color to educate the rest of us. All of us must take responsibility for educating ourselves about the history of racism in this country and about how systemic racism and institutional racism works and persists. As a college, we accept responsibility for continuing to provide resources and opportunities for this education. And we must be ready to engage and act. This work will require energy and bravery and determination. Systemic racism in this country has hundreds of years of history, and the fight to dismantle it will take as many of us as are willing to fight, and we must be prepared to persist. We must also be willing to have hard, honest conversations about the history of racism in this country and anti-Black violence, about macro and microaggressions against people of color, including on our own campus, and about systemic racism. And I ask that everyone remember that critiques of our institution, of our college, are a critical part of the work. We should be grateful to all the voices that call on us, that push us to do better, to be better. And here I want to acknowledge the very important role that students play and have played throughout the history of this university in successfully pushing for institutional change. I am united with the entire leadership of this college in our commitment to the anti-racism work that is integral to our success as a college, a community, and a country. As dean, I promise to push for and contribute to needed change, including examining our own daily institutional practices, institutional policies, and our culture. As a linguist and educator, I have devoted a significant part of my own career to helping people understand that linguistic diversity is part of diversity and that systemic linguistic discrimination has devastating impacts for our school system, our workplaces, our housing markets, and far beyond. In my role now as Dean of the College, I accept accountability for leading us as we take on this critically important anti-racism work across the college. We can and must do more to support research, teaching, and evidence-based interventions to combat racism, discrimination, and bias. We can and must do more to make the community on campus look more like the state and more like the nation, and to make our daily practices, our institutional policies, and our culture truly equitable and inclusive. As we move forward, I ask all members of the community to share responsibility for the work that we must do. And part of what we must talk about is what that will look like. I recognize that all of you who came here today to participate are stepping up to the work, and I hope that you will stay the course as we move forward. So with that, let me introduce the panelists, and then I will turn it over to Jessica Garcia, DEI manager in the college, who will be moderating. So on this terrific panel today, we have DeMario Bell, who is the Mentorship Program Manager, Alumni Engagement at the LSA Opportunity Hub. We have Justin Gordon, a recent LSA alum who graduated in 2018 with honors in English with a concentration in creative writing. Elizabeth James, and is Elizabeth, there's Elizabeth, I'm so glad you're here, Elizabeth. Elizabeth James, who is Program Associate in the Department of Afroamerican and African Studies. Jeffrey Morenoff, who is a professor in the Department of Sociology and Director of the Population Studies Center at the Institute for Social Research. And Thomas Vance, a current LSA undergraduate student majoring in Afro-American and African American Studies and African Studies and Political Science. Thank you all so much for being here. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Jessica Garcia.
Thank you, Anne, for those opening remarks. Panelists, I have a few questions we would love each of you to answer. And the first one is reflecting on the murders of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, and Tony McDade as the most recent examples of our nation's long history with anti-Black violence, police brutality, and racial injustice. Can you share with us how you've been engaging during this time? And Thomas, we'd love to start with you. We cannot hear you, Thomas. Hold on. You're not muted, but we can't hear your voice.
There we go. I had my headset muted. So great question. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for being here. I'm Thomas. I'm a LSA undergrad, double majoring in poli-sci and DAS, and I'm also the speaker of the Black Student Union. Initially, I was trying as much as I could to disengage because the recent murders are nothing new. So like the fallout from them is nothing new, but what felt overwhelming was, excuse me, the international response. And it's social media turns into a platform that's exclusively focused on disseminating knowledge and disseminating information. But because none of this is new, this is stuff we talk about in our organization, this is stuff we talk about in our classes, I'd rather talk about racism, systematic and systemic injustice, you know, not over the summer. And that's not to say that the conversation shouldn't happen, but rather that different people process it differently. And so, my first run in or first instance of police brutality was Trayvon Martin when I was in middle school. So it's like in the 8-9 year time span since that happened, it's 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 always going on. So while I wanted to disengage at first, the amount of support that it seemed like the community needed caused me to get a little bit more engaged. So besides donating and finding places to spread information, a lot of what I've been doing is having conversations with my student org about how students can best support other Black students at this time, making sure that I'm checking in with everybody on my executive board, and that they're able to still get done what needs to get done, but also have time to process the events, and then finding ways that I can support them. So if they're on the front lines, what is it that I can do to make the work easier or make it more efficient? Is there a load that I can take off of you and just get done myself? Finding different ways to make sure the community, but also, my peers and my executive board are doing okay. That's how I've been engaging.
Thank you for that. If we could move to Justin, if you could share with us, how are you engaging right now?
Thanks a lot, Jessica. Appreciate you for the time. Thank you, Thomas, for your response. Me, myself, Thomas, just really gave a lot of good points. None of this is new, but we all know that what we need to focus on is everyone has a different role to play. Me, myself, I'm a storyteller, and this moment, this current occurrence has to be documented. And so as an artist, I want to make the soundtrack of the revolution. I've been busy. I'm in the studio right now, making the soundtrack to the revolution. Giving people music to protest to, giving people the music to take their socks off after they're done protesting, and they might be bruised and calloused, and they can listen to the music and still laugh and dance with themselves and dance with their partners and their friends and family and know it was all worth it. I'm creating art so that when people are bleeding from the side of their head or get mace all in their eyes, or they just tired, they can have something to give them some encouragement. So we all have our roles, and we all have to clearly identify and play our roles. Even if just like Thomas said, you have to be support to the people that's actually out in the front lines. Like in this particular time, a lot of people call me and fearing for my life. Like, Justin, are you out there protesting? No. Instead, I watch people kids. If people decide to go protest and I'm in the neighborhood, I'll watch your kids for you, or I will make sure that you feel that support. Because it's important right now that everybody has to believe in themselves and have trust that what they're doing is helping towards the revolution. It's the social media. I watch a lot of social media and I try to help through that way. But right now I'm actually real life with real human beings that's really being impacted. And it might not be the perfect way to do it, and I might not always have the right thing to say, but I will be there. My presence will be there in servitude as we move forward.
Thank you, Justin. It's great. Elizabeth James, could you speak to us a little bit about how you're engaging? We've got to unmute your mic. Hold on.
There we go.
Great, thank you.
I think for me, I first began working at U of M the year of Rodney King. And so hearing about these latest murders, just as Justin and Thomas said, there was nothing new about what had happened, but there was everything new about it. And as someone who considers, I really do try in my capacity in my life to be a healer as best that I can, a storyteller, a person who is holding these spirits in my heart. I spent a lot of time praying for their spirits as they ascended. I felt as though until we really do stop and think that these are individuals who are leaving us much too soon. And coming off of the pandemic, it really struck me in a different way because we had lost so many in our community, particularly in Detroit, to COVID. So from both sides, we were being really, the Black community was being bombarded with death. And death is a crossing over, it's a natural occurrence, but it isn't a natural occurrence in these cases. It's something that should remain shocking. It should not numb us. It should be something that we stop and really take mark of what is happening with each person who is leaving us and being taken from us. So I spent some time with that. And, of course, people were reaching out and I was reaching out to them and just trying to find ways to document about them. As a librarian, I feel very strongly about making sure that we will have records of them so that it's not as though their lives were in vain. And it was really important to me that, working with our young people in the community, as well as our elders, because I am high risk health-wise, I decided that, one of the things that I could do was to cook. So I spent a lot of time cooking, taking plates to elders in the community who couldn't cook for themselves. That was something that I felt very strongly about, even if it was just driving by and waving and, letting them know that somebody cared in the midst of all that was happening. And sometimes, zigzagging down the road between protests and, just different places in the city. I was just so proud because, as Justin said, each person has a role to play. And I was able to see that in full, it was just so powerful. And so I find myself often just thinking about, okay, what is this new world we're building? And as a doula, I feel as though we are birthing a new world. We're going to come out of this very different than the way that we went in. So I think that's how I've been engaging so far. I'm trying to think of other things and other ways to engage because I think it's a very creative time. I think it's a time where we can really do some self-searching and think about what are the gifts that we have that we can share best with others and that will bring meaning and help others. So that's how I've been engaged.
Thank you, Elizabeth, for that. Cleo Wade has a new quote that's out right now. She's a beautiful writer that says, "We are the builders of a world that has not been built." And I think that speaks so closely to what you're saying. Thank you for that. Jeff, could you share with us, how are you engaging during this time?
Yes, thanks. First, I wanted to just say that as someone who approaches this conversation from a position of white privilege, I want to follow the Dean's example, and I think it's important to just say out loud that Black Lives Matter, and to acknowledge that these horrible murders of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor and others, they're not isolated incidents. Unfortunately, they're part of a broader pattern of structural racism, and that pattern's taken more lives and done more damage historically than any pandemic that we suffered. And it's part and parcel of how people of color especially are experiencing the current pandemic. And I'll have more to say about that as the conversation goes along, but I just wanted to acknowledge where I'm coming from in this conversation and what my context is. So what have I been doing? I've been doing a lot of listening, a lot of reading, and trying to absorb as much information as I can about how other people are processing this current moment. and especially how people of color are experiencing injustice. I've also been participating in conversations like this, not all of them as public as this one, but with people in my circle of colleagues and friends, reaching out to people who are formerly incarcerated, who I do a lot of work with, both in my teaching and in my research, to see how they're being affected. And just thinking about ways that I can use my position in leadership at the university, my role as a teacher, and my role as a scholar to enact change and to also gain a deeper understanding of structural racism and how it ties into social inequality. In addition to those things, I have been engaging in a lot of deep personal reflection about my own white privilege and about the way it informs my everyday interactions and behaviors. And thinking about how deeply saddened and depressed and angry this moment has made me, and how little progress I've seen over my lifetime in striving for racial justice, but also thinking about the glimmers of optimism that I've also seen. And I want to also admit that this has kind of radicalized me in a way that I didn't think was possible for someone in my 50s to be radicalized. But by that I mean that I've been thinking my first reaction is usually to think about policy prescriptions for social problems. And I still have that reaction, but this moment and the incredible galvanizing support that it's garnered has had me thinking about broader social change than I would have previously thought possible, and about visions for a better society in addition to incremental policy changes that we could use to get there. Thanks.
That's great. Thank you, Jeff, for sharing that. And DeMario, how have you been engaging?
Sorry. Yeah, thank you so much, Jessica, and thank you to the panelists, Dean Curzan, for engaging me in this conversation. And I do want to just take a moment and say, at this present moment is the private memorial for George Floyd, his family and the loved ones. So if we can all just take a moment and just give reverence and just give them our thoughts during this time, because they need all of our prayers and support. You know, Jessica, I feel like my answer is so long and so complicated because I've had varied emotions over the past couple of weeks, but also that's just coupled on, 30 years of experiences that I've had as being a Black male navigating America. Over the past couple of weeks, I've felt pain, hurt, exhaustion, personally. My friends have felt that. My Black colleagues have felt that as well. What we've learned about Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, George Floyd, and Tony McDade in the past couple of weeks has been very hurtful and has been very devastating for our nation. But these are not news stories. These are stories that have been happening for decades, for generations, and they continue to happen. I watched what happened to George Floyd, and all I could think about is another example of modern day lynching, where the police murdered this man in broad daylight. And it reminded me when African slaves and Black people were lynched, the community would come out and watch the lynching. And that's all that I could think about. And I was filled with so much hurt and so much pain. And then I said to myself, I said, we know, just based on the data, that police manage to de-escalate, disarm, and not kill white people every day. And there are two standards of policing, one that's reserved for Black and brown people, and then there's one that is reserved for white people, and it's completely unfair. And I spent this weekend, I reflected on the story of Emmett Till that many of us know. And for those who don't, I want to just share just a truncated story about the story of Emmett Till, because it is so relevant today. Story of Emmett Till, a teenage Black boy who lived in Chicago with his mom, went to the South Mississippi to visit his grandmother and uncle. And he was at a store with some friends, and the accusation is that he whistled or he made a comment at a white woman who worked at a grocery store. She in return told her husband, and he and some friends in the middle of the night went to Emmett Till's grandmother's house, asked for him. And the grandmother and uncle said, "We give you anything." And they didn't want it. They wanted him. And in the middle of the night, they took this young Black body out into the woods, beat him, where the mother couldn't even identify him. They beat him, tied a tie rod to his body, shot him, and threw his body into the river. Imagine being Emmett Till's mom, getting a phone call that your son has just been murdered and you sent him away to visit family. Imagine the pain of getting that phone call. And now let's think about the families of Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor, George Floyd, and Tony McDade. We all share this pain, this grief that they're feeling. And some of my friends have shared, DeMario, well, that doesn't personally affect you. It does personally affect me. While I didn't know George Floyd and why I don't live in Minneapolis, but I am a Black male navigating this space. And I am concerned about my personal safety every day I walk outside of my porch. I was talking with a colleague yesterday, and she said, DeMario, she said, I never understood. She said, I never knew that you as an educated, good-looking, articulate Black male experienced racism and prejudice in America. And I paused for a second because I didn't know whether to compliment her or be offended by what she said, by the sheer ignorance. And I said, just because I am well-educated, I have a good job, I have a particular income, I have a degree, that does not exempt me from being Black in America. That does not exempt me from racism. And it does not exempt me from the pain and suffering of the masses of my people. And I wanted to share a personal story with her. I said, when I go shop at Meijer, I have to be very conscious of how close I get to certain individuals. I have to be very mindful of my discourse, my tone, my intonation, because I have to realize that if something happens, sadly to say, the police may not come to my defense. And so I need to be very cognizant of that. And I share with her, even when I go to Meijer, I need to be very mindful about how I dress. I just can't wake up in the morning and say, let me put on some sweats, a baseball cap and a hoodie, and I'm going to Meijer. I live here in Ann Arbor. And Ann Arbor, we have our problems just as every community. And so when I go to Meijer, I have to make sure that I can make it out alive. And so I have to dress that part. Sadly to say, and I don't say that lightly, and I don't say that in jest. We must all, Jessica, to your question, we all share this fight for equity and justice. And like Justin said and Vance, we all share a part in fighting for justice and equity. And we must all elevate the voices of Black people because it is our bodies that are being murdered every day by the hands of policemen who are threatened by the sheer fact that we are Black. And it's sad that today that as Black people and our ancestors who built the very infrastructure that many people enjoy, and not Black people, but the many pleasures and civil liberties that many people enjoy, we don't get to enjoy those same civil liberties. And it's painful and it's hurtful. And we see that institutional, that systemic racism happening every day, educationally, academically, in our healthcare, and societally. And so while all of those emotions were going through me, I was also enamored by the outpouring love and support that I did receive from my white friends and from my white allies who were really genuinely wanting to know how they can engage in this listening and learning, but also mobilize their voices as well. Because your listening and learning cannot stay on the ground. At some point, you have to put on your boots and say, hey, I don't know what to do, but DeMario, I'm going to walk side by side with you, and we're going to do this together. And I also want to caution my white friends and allies, make sure that your advocacy is not perfunctory, because activism does not begin and start with a hashtag. Our fight for justice and equity does not only happen when it's trending on Instagram, Facebook, or Twitter. We are fighting for justice and equity at this very moment. There's a Black body that's probably being killed right now that we don't know of. And so I just want to encourage and caution, if you are with us, be with us. And for those who are silent, shame on you. And I encourage you to do your part, because this fight for justice and equity, it impacts all of us. And this is my last statement. And while I have all these feelings, I do want to say I watched the Today Show yesterday, and I was energized and I was enamored by the young people, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, out raising their voices, elevating their consciousness, their voices, fighting for democracy, fighting for a more civil democracy, out protesting. And I was just overwhelmed with joy because I have hope, and this is just not to sound overly ambitious. I do have hope that my children will live in a better society that I'm living in today. Thank you, Jessica.
Mario, thank you for those very thoughtful and important remarks. I want to thank all of our panelists for engaging with that question and bringing your full selves today. It's a big ask to put you on a live mic and a video with an audience you can't see to share your thoughts on this. And so thank you very much for bringing that. I want to acknowledge that our audience might want to engage with you. And so for folks who don't know, we do have a Q&A option at the bottom of your screen. And we do have moderators behind the scenes who are watching those. And so please feel free to enter any questions that you have, and we'll try to get those forward. If we don't have time today, we will make sure to circle back to them or get them to the right folks to address them. I'm going to ask to move on to question 2 of our meeting today, which kind of builds on everything folks have already acknowledged, right? The ways in which people can engage and the different entry points. And also, I think to DeMario's point, very real concern, how do we make this sustainable? Charles Blow had an amazing op-ed over the weekend in the New York Times where he said, this cannot be the Coachella of social justice. So how do we make sure this is not just summer fashion and that we're really creating meaningful, sustainable, transformative change? And so the question for the panelists, fully acknowledging that the Black community is not a monolithic group and what folks need is not always going to be the same answer. But from your perspective, what do you think are some concrete steps that we can take as faculty and as staff to support our Black students and our colleagues, not just during this time, but also as we move forward and thinking about as a college how we can do better? And so we'll go through the same order. Thomas, starting with you.
Great question. So a couple things come to mind when people ask about how to be allies or how to support. The first thing is, like you and DeMario said, it has to be sustainable. The biggest issue I see right now is people perceive allyship or allyhood as something that is only reactionary, but people are not willing to be proactive about it. So it's like one of the white people that you follow on Twitter will address you as, dear Black friends, I will do better. And like, that's really, it makes people uncomfortable because it's like, you could just individually reach out to those people if you're really friends. But if you feel like you need like a Canva template to say sorry, or, you know, your activism is limited to 280 characters, it's insufficient. And it doesn't feel genuine because it's like, okay, so in times of prosperity, are you going to reach out? Are we going to maintain this relationship? Or do you only show up for Black people like when shit hits the fan? And so I think one of the prime examples of like where that feels disingenuous is with statements. A lot of brands, departments, organizations issue statements and they feel empty because they all read, by acknowledging the problem, denouncing the action, and then providing resources. But rarely have I seen where there is some commitment to a certain action or certain steps that can be taken to be proactive or to at least assuage some of the concerns of Black students and colleagues. So while of course I do not speak for all Black students and all Black colleagues, something that people should do is commit to a series of steps, whether that's finding a way that is within the bounds of the Constitution to bring back the bias response team, finding a way to make sure that classes that are listed under DE&I are actually DE&I, and it's not just learning about Amsterdam, for example. Finding ways to work with professors to allow them to open up space in the classroom at the beginning of a class to process racial incidents. That's happened to me in a couple of my DAS classes, and those professors were white. So I know it's possible. But as for students, finding ways to support student activism. So whether that's getting involved with the plethora of Black organizations on campus and seeing where you can support them and where you can support their work, whether that's providing space for students to organize in the event of an incident, and if they would like to protest, providing that space so they don't have to worry about booking rooms or having materials and supplies. Some of those things can be provided. But it's really about being genuine. It's really about making sure that the cross-cultural relationships that we have are not limited to instances of violence, but rather we can support each other while we thrive, while we step into our greatness, while we're succeeding. Because, otherwise we just post black tiles on Instagram on a Tuesday, and we may post a link to support. And that's not to say that like how you show up for Black people needs to be public, because I think that is it should be private because it feels performative. But making sure that it's not just limited to, when times are tough, that we're showing up for Black people all the time, that it's an actual relationship that you build on. It's not just one that's like, ooh, I'll come help you when you need me, that kind of thing.
Well, Thomas, thank you for that. And I can tell from the reaction of our panelists that there's a lot of consensus there. Justin, why don't you share some thoughts with us?
Absolutely. So I have a feeling that this audience is smart and educated. So I took the time to really, I wanted to write down a couple of points because we want to make this sustainable. So let's think about a couple of things. If you notice, for one, I have a no haircut. I'm going somewhere with this. My grandmother was born in 1943 in Goodwater, Alabama. Teacher for 30 years in Detroit Public Schools. She consistently gets on me about going outside with my hair that maybe looks like this. And now, of course, this is how my hair naturally grows. And scientifically, the nappy hair is actually better to keep my head cool during a very hot temperatures and when the sun is beating down, which just helps in my melanin, which makes me friends with the sun. My grandmother, like I said, was born in 1943, so she's been socially conditioned to think that this is bad. That's racism in a way, because I have to go out of my way to make my hair look like yours. Now, if you Google, I don't know if they changed it yet, because Google might be on this whole Black Lives Matter thing too. If you Google yesterday, unprofessional haircut, Google it, tell me what you see. Then Google professional haircut and tell me what you see. Google those two things and you take it upon yourself to do what you got to do with that information after you look at it. Now, the University of West Virginia, I do research. Shout out to Dean Curzan, one of the greatest professors I ever had. Had a lot of other very educated professors that taught me how to do research, because I don't like talking without reading first. The University of West Virginia put out a research paper that documented that the police force, how we use the police force today in the United States of America, are from slave catchers. This is not a theoretical transition. This is a very, slavery, we have people that go catch slaves from all over the country. They escape. Okay, that's illegal now. So now we're going to turn you into a cop. So you're still going to go catch who we want to be slaves. We're going to put them in jail so they can be slaves, even now, because that's legal. 13th Amendment did not abolish slavery, especially if you can detain someone in a jail. So all I'm here to do is give out facts. You do what you may, and fact check me if you want. Next, Instagram, we all on there now, right? A woman said a poem. She said, check this out. She said, we had to learn. We said, we as in Black people. Me, I represent those who can look in the mirror and find themselves. Yes, I'm a Black man. I'm a preserver of this earth. But I love all people, But people keep messing with dark colored people. So we got to go ahead and defend our brothers and sisters. We got to defend it. Now, let's look at this poem on white privilege. It said, we had to learn your Dutch, your German, your English, your Spanish, your Portuguese. You learned our nothing, and you called us stupid. That's white privilege. You feel me? Okay. One more thing. We talk about Black Lives Matter, and I think Dan Curzan beautifully painted this. Like that. When I first heard the statement like 3 years ago, I got offended. Black Lives Matter, like duh. Like why? How about Black Matter lives? The fact, and it's something that we always try to. This this is a tier 1 research institution, University of Michigan is. Black matter, dark energy. That's something that science still can't get their hands on it. Let's talk about that. Let's talk about how that black matter and dark energy that science can't understand, how is that related to this melanin I got on my body? Let's get into real conversations and not just saying things that make feel good. One more thing, I'm gonna move on. We talk about sustainability. Let's see where our heart is at. The last group of people who had a revolution in this country in the 50s and 60s, our grandfathers and grandmothers, they had a boycott. That boycott lasted, I think, almost a year. When they were protesting, they was going to jail. They had fear of losing their jobs when they protested. Now, it's coronavirus, so ain't nobody got fear of losing their jobs right now because of their protests right now. Might happen later, though. Now, when they went to jail, their children started protesting. That's why it's called it was a children's movement. In the South, the children started to protest. So somebody else made a great point. I think it was DeMario. He made a point about the young people getting out. This is all hands on deck situation. So if you're willing to depart with your money for love, then it might be sustainable. And if your kids is willing to do the same, because the child is going to follow the parent. So if you making sacrifices for love, then the kids will. Thank you.
Thank you, Justin. Lots to think about there. Elizabeth, what do you think we can do as faculty and as staff to support our Black students and their colleagues? Oh, there you go.
There we go. As a librarian, I spend a lot of time thinking about how so much of what we have attempted to do over the years has not been followed through. I look at the initial Black Action Movement demands that still have not been fulfilled. And I do a lot of thinking about the fact that when I was a student here, we had almost twice as many Black students as we do now. You know, if Black Lives Matter, we have to find ways to bring more true diversity to the campus. We can talk about it, but until we see it and are a part of it, these raised voices will make a difference in how our campus operates. You know, it really pains me to hear the same stories of how when I was here in the early 80s, I was the only Black student in classes. I still have students in my, coming to my office telling me about how they're experiencing the same thing now. Why are their professors still, having microaggressions? There should be more training. I would urge that we would have, for every student at orientation, to have some type of training to say that we are coming to a university that does not, you're enrolled in one that does not accept or tolerate intolerance. We've got to do better in terms of how our students feel on this campus, how our faculty feel on this campus, working in the Department of Afroamerican and African Studies, which has some brilliant scholars there. So often it's a very small department. And so, I find myself often in meetings where people are explaining to me what it is to be Black. And I find myself just struck that there's so much in terms of people with great intelligence here, but also great ignorance. And what can we do to change that script? What can we do to treat one another with respect and dignity toward one another? This is something that has been, just on my heart for decades working here. It will be 28 years now. And if I still am having to check in with my Black colleagues across campus to see how they're doing because they've suffered another, off-tune statement from another colleague, or that they've had to sit in a faculty meeting where they've been belittled, or their area of study is seen as being less than. these are things that really trouble me. And so I'm just hopeful that with this outside movement that should be a part of our inside movement, I hope that that momentum picks up. And that's why I draw so much courage and strength and bravery from our students working with them, because as they come in, you know, like our freshies this past year, they were born after 2000. So, you know, they haven't had to live the life that I had when Justin spoke of his grandmother and her internalized racism. Blacks are dealing with that as well. So, you know, colorism, some of the many, many different issues that are all within the Black community, we have to build our way out of those things as well. So you've got, you know, these, what W.E.B. Du Bois speaks of as double consciousness. We're always Blacks living in a white society. And what can we do to help the university understand that we can get to where we flip the script on that, that it won't be as though you know about American history, which does not often include anything about people of color, and the only Black people you know are Malcolm and Martin and Rosa Parks. We've got to expand that lexicon. We've got to bring greater vocabulary to what people see when they think about Blackness. And let's face it, it's anti-Blackness, because that's the automatic default that people have, white and Black. And as so often has happened in our nation's history, as the movements flow for Blackness, so too do the other movements. So it's really crucial that we all work together to break down some of the racism that is internalized within our university, so that we don't have just one building on our campus named for a Black person or for any person of color, you know, and that was even a struggle. So how do we find ways to, you know, just lift up one another in ways where, rather than just saying the words, we're living the words. One of our, recently at the town hall last week, when Rihanna said the beautiful thing about talk, walk, and chalk. And I thought that was so important. Rihanna Anderson is a brilliant young scholar who I was with during her undergrad years. Now she's a professor here in the School of Public Health. We know that our Black students can succeed and excel. I look at Justin out in the world doing great things, and it just fills my heart up, because I know that this can be done. But it starts with us talking about things. Then that's the talk. The walk is then strategizing how we actually make these things happen. And then the chalk is creating policies so that this moment isn't just a moment. It becomes a part of a movement. Nothing is, you know, happens overnight, but we have to be smart and strategize about these things, because believe me, systemic racism, there's been a lot of thought put into it to maintain this horrible system that has just created so much havoc and pain across this country.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Jeff, what are your thoughts on how faculty and staff can support our Black students and our colleagues?
Yes, thank you for that question and for all those incredible responses. This is a difficult question for me to weigh in on, because on the one hand, I don't feel like I should be saying what I think is going to be best for Black students and faculty and staff. On the other hand, I want to take seriously what DeMario said about, if you're going to be an advocate, make sure that that advocacy is not perfunctory, and to also reflect back on what Thomas and Justin were saying about what it means to be an ally. and how that has to be sustainable. I do very much in my own life see myself as an ally of these causes and want that to be sustainable. I want to share a few insights and then turn it over to DeMario. One of them is that I think my own understanding as a teacher of how the classroom dynamics feed, how students of color and other students also experience classroom dynamics differently has been greatly enhanced by the work of the Center for Research on Learning and Teaching, CRLT. And I think it's really incumbent on all of us as educators, as teachers, to learn more about our pedagogical styles and how and be open, as somebody, I can't remember who it was earlier in this conversation said, to giving students the time to reflect on the context that they bring to classes and to really be understanding and listening. It's something that I've tried to build into my teaching more and more every year. I want to share two experiences that I've had where I've tried to make this kind of change part of an endurable pattern. One of them is that over the last 4 or 5 years, I guess, of my career, I've come to participate in a program called the Inside Out Prison Exchange Program. And somebody mentioned the importance of having DE&I requirements that really offer meaningful education on structural racism and the experience of people of color. This is a class in a program, I think, that really does take that very seriously. And it's not owing to the brilliance of the faculty who are leading it, but to the process that we follow. We bring University of Michigan students into correctional facilities, and we have seminars where we have inside students who are the men and women who are incarcerated, and we have outside students who are the university students that come into the facility. And we move away from the sage on stage kind of lecture style towards a more active engagement in a seminar, sitting around a circle. And we eliminate hierarchies that usually divide us between faculty and students, between inside students and outside students. And the kind of learning and awareness building that goes on in that class is something that I like nothing I've ever seen in any of my other classes that I teach. And I just hope that more people have that opportunity to experience it, and that more people have the opportunity to teach it like I have had the privilege of doing. So I totally am with the call for making the DE&I requirements more authentic, more real. And also for opening up space in the classroom for students to share their experiences. The last thing I'll just say is, as a researcher, I also have tried to kind of bring this ethos to my work. And I started a project with a bunch of other colleagues in Detroit called the Detroit Metro Area Community Study, where we really try to give voice to all people in Detroit about how they're experiencing current events. We've spent a lot of time recently focusing on the pandemic and what the health consequences and the socioeconomic consequences have been for Detroiters. And on our next, we've also done a lot of work in the past on racial justice and policing specifically. And I can't wait to get back into the field and learn more about that, ask more questions and engage with students who are interested in this kind of work, to bring them into this and to both help raise awareness, but also to train people in the craft of research. Those are some of the things that I feel like I could bring to the table, but more than anything, I want to leave you with the message that I'm open to learning more and being an ally to causes that surface in this conversation.
Thank you, Jeff, and thanks for telling us more about that work, because it is an excellent and really unique opportunity for students to take advantage of. DeMario, your thoughts?
Thank you, Jessica. Thank you, Jeff. That was a really great response. Jessica, I tried to take some notes as the panelists were speaking, and they pretty much summed up, how I was feeling, but I just want to highlight a couple points. I wholeheartedly agree with Elizabeth that we have some housekeeping to do here at Michigan in terms of our diversity numbers. And so my first point, and then I'll get to my soliloquy, as a university, it is an obligation that we recruit and support more Black and Brown students at U of M. If we really lean into that, to being the leaders and best, how is it that our diversity numbers in terms of Black and brown people are below 10%? It's just, it's counterproductive to the mission and the work that we're trying to do here, you know, as a world-renowned institution. And I see the disparity. My office is, I don't know what to say now, it's in the LSA building. And as a staff member, I'm shocked by the wealth disparity that I see on State Street in terms of students and what they wear and what the vehicles that they drive. I can look outside my window any summer day from the LSA building, and I'll see a BMW, a Maybach, a Ferrari, a Tesla. And this is not faculty and staff. These are students. So imagine being, you know, a Black or brown student, and while not all Black or brown people live in under-resourced community or under-resourced, but I want to make a point here. Imagine being a Black or brown student sitting next to a student whose parent is very affluent in a classroom. Imagine how that feels. And imposter syndrome is real, and the sense of feeling like one belongs is real. And it's an obligation to the university to assess the image that we're portraying in terms of who belongs and who doesn't belong here. My second point that I want to make as a staff member, and I too live in imposter syndrome, so just to say I'm a staff is just different for me to say because I'm so used to being a student. I would encourage that for each department here at LSA to re-examine who is on your leadership team. It is important for Black and brown people and all people of all marginalized communities to see someone who look like them. Oftentimes when I interview for a job or I look up a company, because there's not a company today who doesn't describe itself online, talk about its diversity mission, or have its leadership team available. And I'm disgusted by the lack of diversity that I see. And I want to be honest, I'm disgusted by the lack of diversity that I see. And then the tokenized woman or the tokenized Black person and the tokenized woman who's often the head of HR or the Black person who's often the head of diversity, equity, and inclusion. And that is simply not having a diverse team at all. And so I would encourage us to really start thinking about who has a seat at the table and who voices are we allowing in and who voices that we're not allowing to be a part of that conversation. Because oftentimes Black and brown people don't have the opportunity to ascend to opportunities that we know that we can do. Our CV backs it up, but more often we have to be overly qualified just to do a job, you know, that is very simple to us. And so those are 2 points that I really just want to encourage for us to do here at LSA, because while we can talk about what the world needs to do, we have work to do in home. And so I really want to make sure that it's personalized, that here, that we take care of the people that we have here first. So, thank you.
Thank you so much for that. And again, to all our panelists for those very thoughtful and I think thought-provoking responses, right? You've given us a lot to really think about there. We're going to move to our question and answer portion that we've gotten some questions ahead of time and also in real time from our audience. And there's a few I'd love to take a few minutes to address. And the first one is for Thomas. Going back to your comment about the race and ethnicity, oh, his eyebrows went up, oh boy. The race and ethnicity requirement, and that you mentioned, you know, sometimes it doesn't feel like they're very much aligned with DEI, or it's a real stretch to make that connection. And so the question from the audience was, how can we make that requirement more relevant to contemporary racial issues in America? What would you like to see in a class that would make that feel like more of what you were expecting, more of what you were hoping from the college, in a way that also speaks to where we're at today?
Thank you, whoever asked that question. So if I was taking the LSAT, this would be a question about definitions. And by that I mean, when you hear the terms diversity, equity, and inclusion, whereas I think of racial diversity, DE&I is not just limited to racial diversity. And so I feel like the reason why this class about Amsterdam was considered a DE&I, it met the race and ethnicity requirement, is because I guess you were learning about a different culture. And so I think it's okay to be like, look, if this class is going to be considered a race and ethnicity requirement, then it has to be focused on racial diversity. And that just doesn't only have to be focused on Black people, but rather it could be focused on a specific system. So you could talk about the criminal justice system. You could talk about the military industrial complex. You could talk about private corporations and how they engage with Black people. Like when people talk about big tobacco profiting off of Black and brown folks in poor neighborhoods, those kinds of things. The classes do not just have to be about Black people, and I don't think they should. I think the classes need to be intersectional. I'm happy that the statements and the opening of this conversation mentioned Breonna Taylor and Tony McDade, because those names and those voices are usually left out of these conversations. It's like police violence against Black men, Black women, Black trans, non-binary, and gender non-conforming people. The violence is all well documented. We all know about it. It's just what people choose to focus on different things. The narrative is always focused on Black men, but if we're really thinking intersectionally, Black men are not even at the bottom. And so it's like when your starting point is not like a truly Black feminist intersectional one, then the solutions and the actions you're going to come to don't help. So yes, a race and ethnicity requirement for every department was a demand from 2014 BBUM. That's something that we could do. We just have to make sure you pick the classes the right way. So what that looks like concretely is working with different departments that have courses that could be considered intersectional. So that's not just looking at race, but how race and gender overlap, or how race and socioeconomic status overlap, or even race and disability. But starting from somewhere that's intersectional, that can provide a decent amount of historical context, but also make it relevant so that it's contemporary, and then making sure, like setting SMART goals and reasonable learning objectives that every student, when they walk out of this class, should be able to define what intersectionality is. Every student should have the toolkit to be able to point out when a system is disproportionately affecting a group of people over another group of people, and then equipping those students with either the desire to learn more and get involved, or the ability to educate their friends, their peers, and their colleagues. So yeah.
That's great. Thank you so much, Thomas. Jeff, the next question is for you as a faculty member. This is a question that comes up frequently with faculty, and because LSA is so diverse in its disciplines, many of our faculty struggle with this. How do you make a course relevant to DEI that is not exclusively in the DEI world, right? So it's not a sociology class, for example. It's not a class where it would be intuitive, right, to be talking about topics such as race and ethnicity explicitly. How can faculty still center DEI issues if that's not their wheelhouse?
Excellent question, and one that I bet a lot of people on this panel could also give a better answer to than I, but I'll try it. I think part of it has to do with one of the points that Thomas made about just opening up space in your classroom for people to to tell you about their own context and how they're approaching that class and what their trigger points might be. Part of it is really, I mean, the word inclusion is really important in D&I, and I think, you know, fostering an inclusive environment in the classroom. It's not all about the substance of what you're teaching, it's also about how you're teaching it and what kind of environment you're building in the classroom is probably my biggest answer to that question. I'm also thinking back to what I said earlier about the Inside Out program, the prison exchange program. A lot of people who teach in that program are teaching things that have nothing to do with, or very little to do with, criminal justice or with racial justice. They're teaching, for example, classes in the humanities. And these conversations percolate up in so many things that you could possibly be teaching. If you're going to be having a discussion of literature, it's probably, even if the focus isn't squarely on DE&I, I'm sure that you're going to be dealing with issues of racial justice in some ways. But you can, the context in which you're teaching the class, the way that the kind of environment that you create within the classroom, I think are all part of these principles. I don't know as much about, I haven't thought as much about how to make, what it would require for a class to fulfill a DE&I requirement. But that's something that I look forward to giving more thought to, because I think it's definitely an important issue. And I'm glad that Thomas and others have raised it.
Thank you for that. And so I think I'll take your suggestion there, and let's hear from some of the other panelists. What do you think faculty can do to still make their classes relevant to DEI, to still be addressing DEI issues, so that this is kind of a through point in every discipline, not just relegated to a few? Elizabeth, what are your thoughts on that?
Just from what I hear from students, I think the earlier suggestion about making space when events happen, current events, having that time, because often, whether it be through social media or through the different ways that our students are being impacted by current events, some in the class who might not have any awareness of this issue that could definitely be affecting their classmates, this would be an excellent opportunity to really hone in and stop for a moment and focus on what reality is. U of M's a public university. The notion that we should always be thinking of the public good and what's happening in our world, to take that time to just kind of break down, hey, here's what's happened today. And it will require our faculty to kind of be more in this world too. You know, sometimes our academics, they're amazing people, but they do focus a lot on their research and their field of study, and them being a little more in tune with major events happening that could really be impacting their students, I think would be so, so helpful, because then the professor is opening up and kind of showing their vulnerability at the same time that the students are able to speak about it. And it would be all right if, you know, some of the classmates said, wait, we don't know what you're talking about. Who's George Floyd? You know, then that just opens the door for people to be able to express what's really happening in our day-to-day lives that others might not have any knowledge of at all. And I think that may be, when I spoke earlier about the ignorance, it's not necessarily a malicious ignorance. It's an ignorance of privilege. You know, if you don't have to get up and be bombarded by a series of tweets or a series of, like the kids have group chats, you know, saying, oh my gosh, someone else was murdered last night. Well, if you don't have to be exposed to that, you have no knowledge of what your classmate, who may just be sitting there looking kind of stunned. I know there have been some mornings, I remember one time I was coming in and I was very, very heavy-hearted. And one of our facilities workers, he saw me, and we both just came to one another and just hugged each other. And we were the only two Black people in this whole mix of people going through the fishbowl at that time. And yet it was such a comforting thing, because we both knew what the other one was feeling so heavy-hearted about. And if that can spread to where others can gain empathy and compassion for one another in these world events, that, you know, I think that's what we're seeing now, that the world is recognizing that there's so much that needs to be changed. And that kind of momentum is the kind of momentum that can change the world. I really do believe it. this is not like any other movement we've ever experienced in terms of on a global level, somebody worrying about the issues that we here as African Americans since 1619 have had to deal with and hold on our shoulders, hold in our hearts. Sometimes my chest feels so heavy I can't breathe. But when I see the Black students, when I see my Black Scout colleagues and others, it's one of the reasons why it gives you that strength to go on. So if we can spread that to where others understand and are able to kind of promulgate that compassion, I think it really taps into, Reverend Tutu has a beautiful book called Made for Goodness. And I think intrinsically all humans are good. It's just we haven't been taught how to be good. We haven't been taught how to care for one another. It's a very, technologically based society that we're being in now. But that's why I love when our students do study abroad, because they're able to then go into the real world and see what it's like in societies where this isn't the case. And so I think that those are just some ways that I would encourage our faculty to do some thinking, to step outside their comfort zone, because that's a challenging thing. You get your syllabus, you can use it year in, year out, some will tweak them and others don't, but at the same time, just being aware of what's going on in the world and bringing it into your classroom, I think would really, really benefit the students, because they shouldn't have to just come to DAS to talk about what's on their heart. And that should be something that just should be spread throughout the campus. It's a beautiful thing when we are able to gather together in peace and love, but that should be spread to all of the campus.
Thank you for that, Elizabeth. And Justin, I'd also like to hear from you, right? So as a recent graduate, you've got your whole undergraduate class to reflect on now, all the classes you were in. How can faculty who are not in disciplines that are specifically focused on DEI topics make their classes more relevant to DEI issues?
Absolutely, thank you. For one, let's just start by, here's a concept, telling the truth. Like let's tell the truth in these classrooms. Okay, let's go section by section. English. Okay, you might have Black or poor students, that have trouble with English, or questions. Less than 100 years ago, say 1920. Okay, I'll be generous. 120 years ago, you were killed if you had a book in your hand and you were Black and brown. If you think in 100 years, people go from being killed for having books to being able to just master the English language, then you should get a person to shake on their hand a full ride scholarship and a job of their choice. This is like, this really happened. We want to talk about science. We can think about how all the ways, in different ways, science has tried to discredit black and brown people. They just now, very recently, just finally admitted, after we all knew that the first people came from Africa. Like these people, like this education is a portal to keeping a people oppressed. That is one of the main portals. Like, people weren't allowed to have books, Business. Let's talk about the Ross School of Business, the esteemed Ross. Let's talk about how America is probably one of the greatest capitalistic institutions in the world. Let's talk about how our stock market, and we're one of the world leaders when it comes to money, the almighty dollar. When you have 400 years of a head start in capital and free capital, you should be #1 in the world. Like, let's just be honest. I heard a lot of things about, America's anti-Black. I don't think so. I think America's very pro-Black, because Black people and brown people, we built the whole country. And not like in a metaphorical way, but in the actual sense. That's why they call it the White House. The White House is I know it's close to the Mason-Dixon line, but it was still, I think DC was still had slaves during the time when the White House was made. It was made by all Black people. That's architecture. Let's just talk. Let's just be honest. Like, I can't be on more panels. This is like my third panel probably in history being in Michigan. Like, the moment we start to be honest with each other, the moment we'll take a step forward. Like, I think people are still focused on looking good and being cute. Then let's be honest with these things. I mean, I think America doesn't want Black people to go anywhere. I think America needs Black people to be exactly where they are, in an oppressed, fearful state. That's how capitalism, savage capitalism in our country works. They love us. They want me to have a felony on my record so that I can go out and possibly do something that's in detriment of my community, so they can put me in jail. Or they can say, hey, oh, look, it's not us. Look, it's them. It's Black on Black violence. That's ignorant. All demographics kill each other. They just push Black on Black violence because it's a media tactic. Let's just be honest. Like, in the classrooms, if you want, like, be honest. Like, that's I noticed also when I put about the haircuts. And this is all, and you all drink this in. When you walk into a classroom, when an educator, when a faculty member sees a person, you know, they make judgments just like any other regular person. I come in with my hair nappy, my pants sagging, you're going to associate me with the media has told you what a thug looks like, or what Hillary Clinton likes to say, super predator. Let's just be honest. Like, let's evaluate where we are and stop that. This is a very pro-Black country, because without the labor, the culture that the Black and brown people and poor people, period, have to endure and have to produce day after day, capitalism will be dismantled. And that's why I think we're watching the beginning of the end of that right now.
Thank you very much for that. We have time for one more question, and this one is for DeMario. With interest towards the alumni, some folks are interested in knowing where can alumni go right now if they want more resources or if they want to be engaged in this work. Are you in communication with folks about this, or how to keep them connected or invite them back in?
Yeah, that's a really great question. And Jessica, I'm not sure if I'm the right person to speak about that at large, you know, for all of us who work in alumni engagement, but I can talk to you about the alums that I've been in communication with and how they've responded and how they would like the institution to be held accountable for what's happening. If we take a step back, the university actually has a varied relationship with our Black and brown alumni. And Elizabeth, she spoke very eloquently about that. When I started at the university 4 years ago, I started at the Alumni Association. And in my role, like Elizabeth said, I can't even begin to quantify the same story I would hear from Black and brown alumni about how the university has changed and how the demographic of the university has changed and how the university does not pay enough attention to engaging Black and brown alumni. And I don't want to get off into who we pay attention to, but alumni, Black and brown alumni, they want to be heard, they want to be engaged, but the university has some damage control to do. And I think, quite frankly, the university owes Black and brown alumni an apology for just their sheer fact of just ignoring their contributions that they can make to the university. Whether it's a major gift or not, alumni want to be engaged in all ways. In particular, I've heard from a couple of alums who have, you know, Thomas said this early on, they've been internally processing what's been happening in the world, and then thinking about how they can be invited back on campus just to share their experience about how do you navigate some of your social identities in the workplace? How do you navigate this, you know, in grad school? How do you navigate your social identity in this global marketplace? So I've heard that message from many alums because, like Elizabeth said and Justin said, we are in the middle of a revolution, and I think this revolution is going to bring about real change, and we have to bring our alums into the classroom and back into the university who are in this struggle to talk about how do we really show up in this space post this revolution. And so, you know, in short, Black and brown alumni, they're tired. They don't want to serve on panels like this to talk about their feelings, to publicly disclose, but they certainly do want to have a more active role back into the university. But I think that responsibility, the university bears that burden to really, you know, re-engage them in a more thoughtful and intentional way.
Thank you so much. And Elizabeth, I know you can speak to the Black Alumni Association also.
Yes, that's one of our major strengths is our alumni. And thankfully, having again been here so long, the U of M Black Alumni Association is very active in trying to find ways to do that work that DeMario mentioned. And I think that it's really powerful work that's being done. And we really do try to pull together all of our students, like have them match up. There's the SIBS program that runs through our university for mentoring our younger students with the older students. And we have, you know, just a very informal network that the Black Student Union has begun working with our Alumni Relations Committee that is bringing back folks who have ever had, you know, contact with the Black community and who wants to really, you know, play a role in helping sustain our students. Since BBUM, Bleeding Black in Michigan, a lot of students who were active over the years have really reached out to try to support and help in different ways, which includes donations. This year for Giving Blue Day, they gave more than ever. DAS was the same. We've never had such a large contribution from our alumni. And with our 50th anniversary this year, you know, we formed an alumni advisory board. So anybody who ever took a DAS class or a CAS class over these 50 years, they've been just coming back, and so many incredible, beautiful stories of resilience, strength, and how they were able, in, you know, the words of a great spiritual, your soul looks back and wonder at how you got over. And for those of us who went to Michigan, we have bittersweet stories, but we are still Wolverines. So, you know, go blue, go black.
Thank you for that. And so we're just about out of time, but I want to make a few remarks, and then we're going to turn it over to Anne for closing remarks. This program was recorded, so it will be on the LSA YouTube channel shortly, as well as LSA Gateway. We also asked all of our panelists if they could share with us one book that they think everyone should read. So when we send out the information about where you can find these videos, we're going to make sure to include those details because we want to encourage people to continue growing and learning. And I know they each have some great suggestions. Justin's even got his right there. But I want to be respectful of folks' time and make sure Anne has time for closing remarks. So I am going to make sure that list gets out to the group. And without further ado, Dean Curzan, go ahead with your closing remarks.
Well, I want to just start by thanking all the panelists for this conversation and for your being here, for your willingness to, as Jessica said, to, in this very public space, share with honesty. And so thank you for being here, and thank you for all that you give and are committed to this community. I know that we have many questions that have come in both beforehand and in the Q&A. We have a record of those. As we've said, this is an early step in a very long conversation and set of actions that we must do. And so your questions, we will continue to respond to those. They will inform us as we go forward. Justin, I know that you've been quoted many times, and I'm going to quote you again from what you said right at the beginning of, we all have roles here, and that one of the things that we're being asked to do is all of us to think about what is our role here, and we may have many, and they will change over time. I think about Rob Sellers at the town hall last Friday, who talked about the levels at which one can engage in person, through conversation with others, in our workplaces, in our communities, and then more broadly in the state, in the nation, and the world. And Elizabeth, I so appreciate your words about this is a moment where we could come out different, and the hope and optimism that you bring to that, along with the pain and anger and fear and frustration of this moment, that there's real hope for transformation. And when I hear that, I think we will only transform if we commit to doing that. That the easy thing is to go back to the way things were. And that I too am hopeful that this will be a moment that we commit. And DeMario, you, as you said, I mean, this has to be sustainable. This is not a performance. This is not what's fashionable at this moment in time. This is daily work. This is a commitment to real change that's going to take time, and it's going to take perseverance. And it's going to take courage. And a lot of you have been talking about that courage. And I am thinking about the courage to be in uncomfortable spaces, to participate in uncomfortable conversations, to listen, to hear stories that may upset you or anger you, that may make you confront your own privilege. I'm thinking about, Jeff, you were talking about, what does it mean to start a conversation at the beginning of a class if you're a faculty member? And part of what's scary about that is that those conversations can be messy because they can be honest. And to make that space and to own your own discomfort, that those conversations can be hard, and that we're all going to grow through those conversations, and that they need to happen. I also really hear all of you in terms of the call for action, right? That words are one thing, we must do action. Thomas, I appreciated your comments about the race and ethnicity requirement. That's a requirement that has been revisited again and again. It was revisited. Angela Dillard ran a task force over the past couple of years to look at that. It is clear that it is a requirement we must continue to look at, so that it will do the work that we want it to do as part of the educational mission of this place. I hear people talking about training, and I want to emphasize here that one training, well, this is ongoing, and it has to be, when I think about what does it mean to help faculty, graduate students, all of us in classrooms do inclusive teaching. This is going to have to happen at the individual basis in addition to group trainings. I hear people talking about policies, from admissions to grading, right? Those courses that we know disproportionately weed out women and underrepresented minority students, how privilege plays into registration. How do we support the people who are challenging the status quo? That's student groups and students, that's faculty doing research. I think about the Carceral State Project here at the university. So really important work that's happening, and how do we support that? And I hear very loud and clear about centering Black voices and the voices of people of color generally. The research that's out there, there's a lot of research out there about systemic racism. It is not always centered the way it needs to be centered as we move forward. And as DeMario said, to look at who's at the table, and not only who's at the table, but who is speaking at the table. And that all of this is work that we must do, and that's only the beginning of the list. So I too am very conscious of time. We have work to do, as you all have said, we have work to do here in the college and at the university. And it is also true, we are a research university, and we have work to do in terms of the difference that we make in the broader community, in the state, in the nation, and in the world. And I'm deeply committed to that work. I really appreciate all of you being here. Jessica, thank you for facilitating. And we will keep going. This is a long-term commitment for the college.